I always forget what's on that. I'm a bit loud, yeah. I always forget what's on my bio because you write it once and then you forget about it. But the it's kind of fun to be here today, especially since growing up and teaching apologetics, people would always ask me questions. And I would say, I don't know. I've not really looked at that. But there is someone who has looked at that. And his name is Matt Slick. And he runs a site called carm.org. And he is actually here today. And he's going to speak to you in the coming weeks. So you guys have to be here every Wednesday because Matt's going to speak to you guys. And Matt is one of my heroes. So I should actually let him speak today, but he's going to speak, I think, on September 24th. But all to say is, if you have any questions, we are going to do a Q&A session. And if you could ask a question of God, what would it be? Now, you can just think that Matt is going to answer that question, whatever it is. So make sure that you ask a really good question for him. Wait, what happened to the slides? Did we just... So in front of you is a piece of paper, unless you're fitting in the front pew, in which case you can use this one. And there's probably a pencil somewhere there. It looks like this, right, Polly? Yeah, and there should be a pencil around. Write a question there that you wish somebody would answer. And on the 5th, there's a panel discussion, October 15th. We will gather all the questions and we will answer them. And you can decide if it's heresy or not. We'll see where that goes, right? No, but these are great times to ask questions like, why did God create mosquitoes, right? I think I know the answer, but you'll have to wait till the 15th if anybody does put that down. Anyway, before we start, I want to introduce this by asking you a deep theological question. Is it evil to eat for bland chicken curry? Now, as an Indian origin, think it's horribly evil to eat bland chicken curry. And I thought that I could eat chicken curry because I grew up all over the world and I would eat chicken curry in the Bay Area in Silicon Valley until I came here and tasted Boise hot. I cannot handle Boise hot. It is way too hot for me. So I know that people in this area know what hot chicken curry should taste like. So you can answer that and we'll talk about it. Anyway, years ago, a friend of mine came up and asked me, she said, my daughter is doubting her faith. Would you be willing to spend some time answering her questions? And I said, well, if she's willing, I'm willing. So her daughter was willing. She was really interested in finding out all the answers to her questions. So it turns out that she'd just gotten out of the Army and had spent 4 years in the Army and was wondering about Christianity. So I met with her about 4 or 5 times with the permission of my wife, right, in a public place. And I spent time with her to prove 4 things. One, I proved that faith should never be blind. And I did some of this last year, or was it last year or 2 years ago? I don't remember. I think it was 2 years ago, right? We did a whole series of these, and I went through most of these. But if you haven't been through it, Matt and a bunch of other people, Wayne Chun, who's a good friend of mine, and going to go over this for you, and they're going to cover different topics. So definitely be here for that. But so these are the 5 things I did with her. 1, and then 2, I said I proved that God exists without using the Bible. I use science to prove the Bible, to prove God exists. And I have a book called Who is Agent X? Basically, proving science and logic show it's more rational to think God exists. And then I covered this topic about the New Testament. I did that here too. Proving the New Testament is accurate using archaeology and manuscript evidence. And then I proved that Jesus really existed and rose from the dead using all the above. By the way, you should note something about this. If 2 is true, proving God exists without using the Bible, and in that I proved that God created everything, time, matter, energy, and everything that exists. So if you can create time, matter, and energy, you can bring somebody back from the dead quite easily, right? So now by the time you get to 4, it's like, yeah, of course, no problem. Okay, and then number 5, we explain why Christ had to die and why God must punish sin. So I did all these with her, and at the end of it, she said, okay, Neil, this all makes sense, and I'm starting to understand it, but I have one big, deep question. And I said, no, the question. It's the problem of evil. She said, well, how did you know that? I said, because I get emails from atheists. The time, in fact, here's one of them. It says, Neil, one of the many reasons now I am an atheist, an anti-Christian, and unable to punctuate my statements properly is because the God of the Bible, the Christian God, is very rational and very evil. I can give you many examples, but we'll try to keep it short. God flooded the earth and killed everybody, i.e. murder, including children and babies. So her next question was, how can God exist when there's so much evil in the world? And if he exists, why doesn't God stop it? This is the God and the problem of evil. The question is, how can I trust God when he's allowed so much pain in my life? It's not only an atheist question, it's a Christian question, isn't it? It's, God, why did you let my wife die? Why did you let 6 million Jews be slaughtered in the Holocaust? Why didn't you stop it? Why did my baby die? Surely you could have prevented that. Why did my friend die? We prayed. You could have healed him. The question is so intrinsic to who we are, we want to know the answer. And here is the important thing that you should know. If you're ever witnessing to an atheist, this fundamentally ends up being one of the most important questions. The second most important question is, if there really was a God, would you follow him? And the answer is always no. It's not evidence. The atheist doesn't want the evidence to be there. And so that's where you have to work beyond that point, and that's why it's very important to get them to... apologetics is the defense of the faith, using logic, science, reason, philosophy, right? But it is also the smokescreen that atheists use, and a lot of times you have to get past that smokescreen to the very issue of, well, you don't want to believe because you don't want to be morally accountable to somebody, right? But until you get to that, you can't have that conversation because they'll hide behind every other conversation. Right? I found that, because if I jump to that, they're like, no, you have to prove this, you have to prove this. So I go through the whole thing, and then I'm at the right place. Okay, so the question, though, is also, who will you be in 10 years? Will you be an angry victim as a Christian? Will you be a sad, depressed person? Will you be angry at God because your life has not been easy like somebody else's? Will you be fulfilled in life and in God? Will you be a wise old teacher or a wise or unwise old curmudgeon? So let's answer these questions. And I want to focus on the atheist answer first, because that's always a very interesting way to get there. So the question is, how can there be a God when there's so much evil in the world? But if you think about it, that's not really the question. The real question is, how can there be a good God when there's so much evil in the world? Now, to phrase this properly, we have to go to a guy named Epicurus, who was a Greek philosopher. He says, is God willing to prevent evil but not able? That he's not omnipotent, meaning all-powerful. Is he able but not willing? Then he is malevolent, meaning evil, right? Is he both able and willing? Then whence cometh evil? If he's neither able nor willing, then why call him God? So what he's really basically saying is, how can there be a good God when there's so much evil in the world? Either he's unable to stop the evil, meaning he isn't, or he is unwilling to stop the evil, meaning he isn't good. That's basically what Epicurus is saying. And so we have to answer this. And the way we answer it, I answer it, being an engineer, I'm going to answer it with a flow chart. Flow charts are very good, right? So your thing is, evil exists, therefore a good God does not exist. So I'm like, okay, Mr. Atheist, let's talk through this. Let me understand this. I want you to understand where this leads to. So he says, okay, God doesn't exist because evil exists. Well, now, if you say evil exists, though, you must admit something. What is it you have to admit if evil exists? That good exists. That there's actually a difference between good and evil, right? Because if there's no difference between good and evil, what do you do? But if there is a difference between good and evil, what do you need to make that distinction? A standard. Right? Without a standard, you don't know what the distinction is. Have you ever walked into Starbucks and the smallest drink on there was a tall? What? I want the small. That would be the tall. No, but tall is not small. And you're like, so what is the standard? You can't have a tall. I grew up thinking I was short because I grew up in Sudan, and a lot of my friends were all Dinkas, which is a tribe, and their average height is 7'2". So I didn't know I was tall until I went to India, and I was a giant. I couldn't even fit in the buses. Right? And then I came to America, and I figured I was average. A lot of people are tall just like me. But so you have to have a standard. What does tall mean in your society? What does it mean in Starbucks? Well, it turns out Starbucks has a whole bunch of drinks they don't tell you about because they want to sell you. But for now, they only have the grande. Have you ever walked into Starbucks? It's like, well, grande. Well, do you have any other sizes? Yes. Why don't you have the prices up there? I have no idea, but apparently it's a good marketing tactic. Okay. But here's the problem. With standard, you can't state what something is. For instance, without a standard, your moral values are merely preferences. Right? It's like saying you like vanilla ice cream, but if someone else likes banana split ice cream, that's evil. No, why? Well, without an objective moral standard, that's just a preference. Without a standard, your moral values are merely preferences. Right? It's just like a preference of curry. But if you say there is a moral standard without a moral value without a standard, that's like saying I can't believe God exists because I don't like spicy chicken curry. Right? You just so happen to prefer a good bland ham. Hitler prefers killing Jews. Is there any difference between the two? Right? Prior to 1872, every culture preferred having slaves as long as they were not the slave. Right? God prefers making you suffer. Who's to say they or God were or are wrong or bad or evil? It's merely a preference. In which case, your complaint is basically that you don't believe in God because you don't like that somebody else loves curry. You don't like God's preferences. And that takes us right back to that thing. You have to have a standard. Now, here's the problem, though. If you have a standard, what do you need? Somebody to make the standard. You need a standard giver. But if you have a standard giver, who is that standard giver? Can man be the standard giver? Because man is what? To have a standard, you have to have an authority. You can't have a standard without an authority to say, well, otherwise you'll go back to preferences. You know, it's a king's preference. The king doesn't like you, so he's going to kill you. Well, what? Right? So you've got to have a standard giver. But if you have a standard giver, who is the standard giver? Is the standard giver going to be man? Well, you hope not, because now a lot of people on the other side of the aisle would say, well, yeah, I think man should be the standard giver. And then I ask them this. I say, well, who is? Which man? Herr Hitler or Mother Teresa? Right? Now, well, not Hitler, of course, definitely not Hitler. Then they'll say, maybe it's society. And I say, well, you can't have society be the standard giver. And let me tell you why you can't have society be. Because until the 1800s, every society thought it was okay, except for the Jews, or the Israelites, thought it was okay to have slaves as long as they were not the slaves. When slavery became banned, did slavery suddenly become immoral? No, slavery was always immoral, despite the fact that every society thought it was okay. So society cannot be the standard giver. So if the question is, who can be the standard giver? Where do I get the standard? Well, is it Mother Teresa? No, it can't be Mother Teresa. Why? Because Mother Teresa doesn't have authority over us. So you see the problem? To have a standard giver, the standard giver has to have authority. Well, let me ask you this. Who's the only authority that can tell Hitler he has to treat the Jews like a brother or sister? Who's the only authority that can tell the slave owner you have to free the slaves? Who's the only authority that can say everybody in this room has to treat each other equally? Who's the only authority that can tell every single human being in the entire world that they have to treat each other equal, and they all have certain unalienable rights? Who can do that only? The creator of mankind, right? And you just see that we came to this standard. Now let me explain that if there is no objective moral standard, why was Hitler wrong? And if there is an objective moral standard, why do you get to decide what it is and not Hitler? Right? And the answer is quite simply this. Neither of us get to decide what it is. We need an authority who is over all mankind to set the standard. That's the answer. And that's why the Declaration of Independence says, we hold these, you know the thing, right? You know. We hold these truths to be self-evident, because we can self-evidently coming up. But by the way, I should throw this in, because it's very important I put this in there. But it is self-evident to us, but did you know that you have to have a creator to give you unalienable rights. But you know that it's only the Christian creator that gives people equal rights. Islam doesn't, Hinduism doesn't, Buddhism is basically atheism, right? So there's no creator there. So it's only Christianity that does. Oh, and Sikhism, by the way, that came 1,500 years later, also said, hey, that's a good idea, we're going to incorporate it in. But other than that, it's only Christianity that says all men are created equal, which is why you can't, if you don't have a government based on the Christian Bible, you don't have inalienable rights. Just remember that. This is not a thing on politics. But anyway, so Mother Teresa can't do it. It has to be, and I should go into this. I had an atheist with me, and he said, well what about the standard is DNA? How about we evolve morality? And I said, well, I have a problem with this. Let me tell you why DNA can't be the standard. Let's say that we're playing Scrabble one day. And we're both kids. I'm over at your house, and we're playing Scrabble. And we throw out the Scrabble board, and the Scrabble board says, amazingly, take out the garbage. Now, are you obligated to take out the garbage? It's a Scrabble board. It's an accident. It amazingly evolved into that, or whatever. Right? So you have no obligation. But let's say I leave, you go to bed, but you forget to put out the Scrabble board, and it didn't say that. It was just scrambled. And you came down the next morning, and it said, take out the garbage, Mom. I mean, by the time she put all those words in there, she could have taken out the garbage herself, but that's not the point. Now, are you morally obligated to take out the garbage? Yes. Why? Because she is an authority over you, and she is a person. The Scrabble board accident was not a person. This is a person. But what if it said, take out the garbage, little Timmy? You're like, little Timmy, you take out the garbage. I'm going to take out the garbage. You have no authority over me. It has to be an authority. It has to be a person. So that's why you can't be morally obligated to a thing. So, you can't get an ought from an is, as my friend Frank Turk always says. So we're left down with the creator of man is the only possible authority to create all that, to give you a standard, to give you, tell you what the difference is in good and evil, right? So this is all there. Now, here's the question, though. The standard giver has to be God. And by the way, this is the verses on why God is the source of morality and the law. But here's the problem, though. We started with this premise that if there is a good God does not exist, right? This is the whole problem. So let's work backwards on this. If there is so much evil in the world, but there is no God, then there is no what? Standard giver. There is no standard giver, there is no standard. There is no standard, there is no difference between good and evil. And if there is no difference between good and evil, then evil doesn't really exist. It's just a preference. In which case, your question really becomes, how can God exist when there's no evil in the world? Is this what you intended to ask me? Let me summarize it, because a lot of times people get lost. So let me summarize this in the words of a friend of mine. You believe evil disproves God. That means you believe in a difference between good and evil. So if so, there must be an objective standard between good and evil, which means there must be an objective moral law. But if there is an objective moral law, you must frame an objective moral law giver. Otherwise, where did it come from? But that is who you're trying to disprove and not prove. But if there is no moral law giver, there's no moral law. If there's no moral law, there's no good. If there is no good, there is no evil. What then is your question? So we see that this really is the end result. So therefore, this is illogical. There are other reasons why evil exists. In other words, these two are both logically false. You can't come to this conclusion there are other reasons why evil exists. And that's what I want to talk about for the rest of today. In fact, what do we say? It would seem that your recognition of the presence of evil, rather than disprove the existence of God, actually what? Proves the existence of a supreme moral standard giver. Okay, but why does God allow some people to suffer and others not to? What about the evil that men do? What about natural disasters? What about genetic defects or the death of a young baby? Right? How do we answer all this? So to understand evil, we have to start delving into the characteristics of God. God can do anything. This is a question. It is a trick question. True or false? Come on, guys. You can think of something God can't do. He can't sin. What else can't he do? He can't make a square circle, right? So here, yes, God can do anything, but there are some limitations on him. What? He cannot sin. He cannot stop being God, right? Where can you go when you are everywhere? Nowhere. God can't go anywhere. Right? He can't forget. He can't learn. He also cannot do anything that's actually impossible. He cannot make a round square in two-dimensional space. You're like, why two-dimensional space? Because if you did it in three-dimensional space, it's a very squat cylinder. Never mind. Okay. But he cannot make 1 plus 1 equal to 3. He cannot be illogical. He cannot be irrational. Now, how can I say all that? Well, the reason I can say, by the way, here's a whole bunch of verses on what God can do. But here's why I say that. Because the very nature of God is rationality. His character is to be logical, just as his character is to be loving. He cannot stop being what he is. He can't stop being God. So rationality and logic and mathematics, you're like, mathematics? Are part of the very fabric of God. If they weren't, then they wouldn't exist. They weren't created by him. They are part of his very nature. They emanate from him. He cannot violate his own nature, and that's why they're also good and necessary things. Let me tell you a story. I was once driving down the street with a friend of mine, and while he was driving, he turned. I was explaining something about God, and I ended up with this. It's just logical. And he turns to me and he says, Neil, you're using man's logic. You don't know what God's logic is. And I looked at him and I said, that is the most stupidest thing you have ever said in your entire life. Now, he's a good friend. He said, okay, fine, tell me. I said, look, either you have logic or you have illogic. There is no God's logic and man's logic. If man's logic does not follow God's logic, it's illogic. You don't have logic. Now, there's no God's truth and man's truth. It's God's truth and God's lies, right? If your truth does not match God's truth, it's a lie. There is no illogic in this. So either if you found logic, you found God's logic. 1 plus 1 didn't one day become equal to 2. It has always been equal to 2. God didn't say, I'm going to make 1 plus 1 equal to 2. It comes out of his very nature, his very presence. And here's how you can tell if something's transcendent, right? There's transcendent truth and non-transcendent truth. If that truth would still be true if there was no universe, it's transcendent. If there was no universe, 1 plus 1 be equal to 2? Absolutely. Would set theory be equal to be true if there was no universe? Absolutely. You're like, what is set theory? You know, the group of, you studied all this in high school. The group of things is a set of things, a set of that. It's true. All the axioms and all are true if there was no universe. But on the other hand, if there was no universe, could physics be different? Physics is not transcendent. Why? Because God created another universe with different physics. Would biology be different? Absolutely. It's not transcendent. Chemistry is not transcendent. What are the transcendent truths? Mathematics, logic, set theory, and you can go through all that. Truth, rationality. Right? These are transcendent truths, and they come out of the very nature of God. God didn't one day make them. It has always been there. So, given that, God cannot artificially create relationship. Why? Because relationship by definition has to develop over time and by interaction and by creating trust. It cannot be pre-programmed. The desire can be pre-programmed, but the relationship cannot be pre-programmed. It has to develop for humans in time and space. So if somebody creates you an AI robot to be your girlfriend, you don't have a relationship with it. It's not real. Right? Because it doesn't have a choice to say, I don't want to have a relationship with you. Well, actually, they might program that in there. That'll help us all. Okay? So, therefore, it is logically impossible for God to create a world with free agents where the free agents are prevented from sinning. I'm not saying that they won't sin or they will sin, because God could make a universe where none of the free agents sin, but it may not be actualized easily, so we can say it is logically impossible for God to create a world with free agents where the free agents are prevented from sinning. So you can't have the free will to have a relationship unless you have the free will not to have a relationship. Right? So you can't have a relationship. You don't need to you even take out that free will out of there. You can't have a relationship unless you have the free will not to have that relationship. Okay. I'm not talking about salvation and predestination, Arminianism, or Calvinism. I'm talking about your daily, everyday desire and willingness and ability to sin or not sin. Okay. Because let's be honest, Christians sin. Right? Okay. So it is illogical and also irrational if God, and therefore not possible for God, to create a world where, with free will, where disobeying God has no consequence. Let me say that again. God cannot create a world where, well, beings with free will, where disobeying God has no consequence. Because God is not irrational. He's not going to say don't do something unless it has some result. Right? He's not going to say, well, don't step on that dot. Why? I just feel like it. That's not God. That's irrational. Don't step on that dot because that's a button and it'll blow up half the world. Oh, yeah. God, good idea. I shouldn't do that. Right? So God's not going to tell you to not do something if it has no consequence. But if it has a consequence, then that means you could do it. So let's look at another one. Imagine God created a world where you were free to do anything you wanted to do, including kill somebody, but the minute you try to kill somebody, God would stop you. Then would God have to tell you not to do it? Like, you're not going to be able to do it anyway. I'm going to stop you. Right? So God can't create a world where you are not able to do sin because he stopped you from doing it. Right? So, and why would God ask you not to kill somebody if you can't do it? No, it doesn't make sense. Okay, so let's look through this. If God were able to stop you from being able to hurt others, would the law have any purpose? No. Why ask someone not to do something they cannot do anyway? The only reason you'd ask someone not to do something is that they could do it and it had bad consequences. So how can God give mankind free will to rebel against him if that free will has no real consequences? It's illogical, and God cannot be illogical. If God is going to give mankind free will to have a relationship, it must be that free will can choose options with bad consequences. Is everybody with me? Okay, thus, free will must involve the freedom to what? Bring pain to ourselves and others. And so you have two choices, folks. You get to choose today. Well, actually, you don't get to choose, but you get to choose what you'd prefer. One, no one has free will and no one suffers. No pain, but no relationship with God. What do you think? Is that a good option? I think this is the better option. Everyone has free will, and suffering exists. Relationship is possible, and there is a way to stop the suffering. So basically, robots are free persons. Which one do you want to be? How many people would prefer to be a robot? You're probably pre-programmed to make that preference if you believe that's true. I want to be a robot. You are a robot. Oh, that's great. So what is the greater good? Genuine relationship and love, or pre-programmed robots who act like they have relationship and love? Right? So the reality is, for true love and relationship to exist, evil must be permitted to what? To exist. That's why evil exists. But we haven't answered all the questions. We could end there, but we haven't answered. There are a lot more questions here. So here's the thing. What were you created for? Why did God create you? Exactly. God desires a relationship with you. And he desired so much a relationship for you, he created us greater than the angels. Right? Which really made somebody really mad. But we won't go into that now. So, but as we go ahead, I want to just put this in your mind. As we start this next section, it is an answer to some of these questions. Is there free will in heaven / the new earth, right? If there isn't free will in the new earth, then we're all robots. If there is free will in the new earth, then won't that be just as bad as San Francisco? I'm sorry, as this earth. How does God solve this problem? It's a dilemma, isn't it? How does he solve the problem of giving you free will and making heaven / the new earth, heaven and the new earth, or does he have robots there? Let me ask you this. Why did God give us the law? He gave us the law to protect us, right? He gave us the law to defend us. He said, if you do these things, you are going to be safe. But you have a choice of doing it. Now, but he gave us the law because when God created the world in the beginning, he created all these physical constraints on the world, and they were part of our world. And so he put all these laws into it. The law of gravity, moral law. Just like we discovered the law of gravity, often we have to discover the moral laws, the new moral laws, the different moral laws for the different equations, right? The laws on chemistry, right? So when we violate God's laws, we know that the only reason he gave us the law is because there are consequences. So when we violate God's laws, what's going to happen? There's going to be consequences, right? So we agreed that God has to allow evil. Now, is it required that God step in and stop every evil action when we disobey his laws? Remember, we said he couldn't. Is it required that he step in and protect us from the consequence of our own foolish actions? Or is it better that we consider learning from our own experiences and creating a society that will limit the evil action by others? And this, by the way, is where governments come in, right? So, we can see that God, if he were to step in, we're back to the robots problem. So he has to allow us to do this. But, man, it's painful. Why doesn't he at least protect the innocent? Or act supernaturally to protect the good people? Right? Well, here's the reality. With free agents, it's not incumbent on God to intervene. And we're just circling back here. If God were to stop evil from being acted out, then the free agent is not truly evil to be. Oh, that's a good guy. I'm not going to let you hurt him. Well, then you don't have the free will, right? If God has to also allows evil to further his purposes. Remember the blind man? Why is this man blind? Was his parents or did he sin? No. So that the glory of God may be shown upon him. How about Joseph? You meant it for evil. God meant it for good. God uses all these things, right? How about Jesus? Most heinous crime in the entire history of the world, right? Destruction of the one who created it. Well, God was using it. Sometimes God needs to use pain in your life to get you to do something. Here's the reason why God doesn't always intervene for the innocent. Because we, the church, are his bride, his agents of mercy. Right? For every person who gets cancer as an atheist is a Christian who gets cancer. So we can empathize and be his agents in that area. Right? We are the workers. We are the ministers. We are the painters. The church is supposed to be the beacon. God has taken all these issues and said, look, I'm going to give you a solution here, and that's the church. You're going to be the bride of Christ. Okay? Now, why doesn't God intervene for the innocent? Always. In the Bible, God usually intervenes supernaturally in a clear way just before he does something very big and very critical to his long-term plans. And the reason I bring that up is because people are like, God's always showing up in the Bible everywhere and doing these miraculous things. Well, here's the thing. If you think about it, there is only 1,500 miracles in the Bible. Old and New Testaments. And yet that covers 4,500 years. That's barely one miracle every 3 years. But more than that, it's never every 3 years. It's like nothing for 400 years. And then boom, 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 right? Why? Because God is going to say, hey, pay attention. Pay attention. We're doing something here. Right? So he intervenes specifically. Now, does he intervene? Does he cure people? Does he heal people? Yes, he does that too. But you can't expect him to go, hey, slot machine, boom. Because he may have a plan for that. Okay, so even in your life, God does intervene occasionally to bring about change in society and in you to mold you. It's just not always the way you wish he'd do. I'm like, oh, Lord, that was not the way I would have done that in my life. Okay, so, but we still haven't covered some of the more important questions. Mr. Atheist wants to know, what about hurricanes? What about natural disasters, right? We want to know, hey, why are people dying? Well, here's the reality about it. It is possible, and I'm just presenting this. It is possible that God cannot create a habitable world with our physical laws, with wind, which we need, but no volcanoes or earthquakes. Why? Because then all the land would erode below the level of the sea. I sat down and did this calculation. Now we have ChatGPT, I could just ask it. But I calculated that if we, and hopefully my are correct, that if we had no earthquakes or hurricanes, all the land would have eroded and we'd be 9,000 feet below the level of the sea. You're like, well, why doesn't he reduce the amount of water? Well, because we need that much water for this cycle. No, global warming isn't true. Let's not even go there. Okay? He's got it all dialed in, okay? And he's not just somebody driving cars is not going to change things. And by the way, I did a whole paper on that. If you're interested, you can call me or send me an email. Similarly for hurricanes, there's no temperature equalization if you don't have hurricanes. If you don't have floods, you have no nutrients or plants in the soils, right? What about slow floods? It violates physical laws. What about earthquakes? It violates physical laws. What about weak hurricanes? You can't have a weak hurricane. What about famines and forest fires? Well, it turns out that most famines and forest fires are completely man-preventable. What about diseases? Many are man-preventable, and many are, well, I don't even need to talk about diseases after COVID, do I? Okay. Here's the reality. Almost every natural disaster and disease can be prevented from causing death by human collaboration and technology. It's as simple as that. So God has said, look, I'm going to give you, mankind, the power to stop these things. There should never be another flood or a drought in the entire civilized world. Why? Because we have 150 years worth of cycles of floods and drought. We know the worst flood. We know the worst drought. Build a dam. Oh, sorry, I'm in church. Build a darn. Man causes evil. Right? The evil anyone does will affect others. Your parents, Adam, Hitler, Che. Right? The only way to stop a person from doing evil is either to destroy him or restrain him. If God, we're all back to the circle again, right? We're back to that point. If God were to start eliminating all free agents who have sinful desires, he would have to eliminate me and you as well, or go back to robots. Back to the robots, right? Now, but here's the question. Why is there pain in my life? God, I mean, I understand you doing that, but why is there pain in my life? And you could take away the pain. Well, here's the reality. God has this set of rules that you need to live a good life, right? If there was no pain, how would you know what the rules were? You would have to go to the rule book. Whoops. Let me go back here. You would have to go to the rule book. Oh, let's see. Is that okay? And then, is that a relationship? No, it's some legalistic format here, right? You want to learn as you go along. And so I said, I went through this. I said, okay, let's do an interview with a man who has no pain, right? Interview with a man suffering from leprosy. He says, look, leprosy doesn't eat away at my body, it just desensitizes my skin. The problem is I feel no pain in my extremities. By the time I realize my fingers or legs are in danger, it's too late, and damage is already done. They fall off due to cell damage. I need pain to know I'm in danger and I don't have it. You are lucky you feel pain. It protects you. When we do stupid things, you know what they say? Play stupid games, win stupid prizes. Right? You do stupid things, you're going to suffer the consequence because God has said, look, this, and he's told you ahead of time often. Now, there are some things he hasn't told us, but a lot of things are common sense, right? I mean, think about it. Diseases. In the Bible, back before anybody had thought of sanitation, God tells what? The Israelites, you go out of camp for the latrine. Right? You wash your hands. You sprinkle hyssop. It wasn't until the 1800s that they discovered bacteria existed. But God told Moses back, what's it, 1500 AD? BC? Right? He gives you these rules, and you extrapolate from them. So you got to have these rules, and you got to have pain. Now, somebody came up to me after one of these things and said, well, Neil, why couldn't they use something else? Why couldn't God use something else besides pain? And I'm thinking, well, like what? What about others? Well, yeah, pleasant warnings. Oh, that feels good. I'm just going to do more of it, right? We wouldn't pull back from it, like drinking or drugs, right? What about mental knowledge about danger? Well, we would still ignore it, like speeding, texting and driving, dating non-Christians, right? We would still do it. In fact, somebody told me, I don't know if this is true, that when they first said cigarettes cause cancer and they put it on the packs, people smoked more cigarettes because they were now all tense about the cancer they could get from cigarettes, right? It's like it doesn't work, right? So what about a different sensation? We would ignore it just like others. Pain has to hurt or it will not work. And of course, as I said, pain and suffering have a purpose. What is it? What? To protect us, to refine us, to humble us, to perfect us, to teach us, to allow us to understand and minister to others, to glorify God, the blind man who said, to point. For instance, when we do I think someone's doing the resurrection, maybe not, but when I did the resurrection track, I said, one of the key things is that many of the apostles, now we can't confirm all of them, but we think the church tradition is that all of them died horrible, terrible deaths, claiming that Jesus had really risen from the dead, right? Which is an important part, because you're not going to lie about something and then die about it, right? Die for it. So some of these are very important points. Okay, so evil serves a purpose, you see. Romans 9 seems to indicate that without seeing the punishment of evil in others, we would never understand mercy, right? It can be used to glorify God, Pharaoh, what we intend for evil, Joseph, right? Again, if God were to destroy all evil, he would have to destroy what? All of us. So you see, we're back into this cycle of, this is it. This is the only answer. You can't get away from this. And you can tell I came up with this after arguing with atheists for hours, right? Because these are all questions they're asking me. What about this? What about this? What about this? What about that? Right? So, what about this? The question about God flooding the earth. Or how about the Israelites killing the people? They wiped out the people in Jericho and all that. Here's the question. Can God murder someone? What is murder? The illegal taking of life. Can God murder? Did God murder those people? So to understand this, I want to put that in perspective. If you heard my Who's Agent X talk, I talked about that at the point of the creation of the universe, we detected that there are at least 10 dimensions totally. 4 of them are ones that we can measure. 6 disappear to our senses after 10 to the minus 23 seconds. Right? Well, that's a very short time, yes. But they're out there somewhere, and if you look at the Kaluza-Klein theory, they say there are actually 6 other physical dimensions. And I call those 6 other dimensions the supernatural dimensions, and the 4 are the natural dimensions. Right? So here's what. First of all, so let's talk about death. First of all, let me tell you something, and this is very important. And we talked about that in the Agent X talk, so Pastor knows this. He's not going to be alarmed. And some of you heard this. You don't have a soul. You're like, what? No, you don't have a soul. Nobody has a soul. Why? You are a soul. What you have is a body. See that? That soul is in one of those dimensions as far as I can understand. Your body's in these 3/4 dimensions. Time is the 4th dimension, right? So your body's in these current dimensions. Your soul is in all the dimensions. So when you die, you don't die. Your body dies, right? So you don't have a soul. You are a soul. God never kills a soul. In fact, there's no record in the Bible of God ever killing a soul. Now, you can argue about what happens in the lake of fire and all that in the future, but currently God has never killed a soul. You will never cease to exist once you're conceived, as far as I understand. And I tell my atheist friends, I said, physical death is merely moving a person from one plane into another after discarding our 3-dimensional body. She's really upset about that point. So in God's extra-dimensional existence, death is similar to moving from one continent to another. That is, you don't cease to exist, you just go somewhere else. God just tells the Israelites, move the people of Jericho over here. They'll never die. And I told my atheist friend, I said, I had a very dear friend, and I said, you will never die. And that terrifies me more than anything. I just hate, you're such an amazing person. I hate the thought that you will never die. Because you will never die and you'll live forever in an existence that will be just horrible and miserable. It scares me. He said, thank you, Neil. Coming from you, I appreciate it. So death is the transition from a limited 3-dimensional existence to a vast, multidimensional, amazing existence. So God never kills anyone. He never kills anyone. He never murders anyone. He can't murder one because murder is the illegal taking of life, and God is the authority who makes the standard. He can decide if he can move. You go, well, wait, if that's all it is, why can't I move someone? Because you don't have the authority to move people. It's called kidnapping. Right? We're not allowed to kill people, but God is allowed to transport some from a limited set of dimensions into his presence for judgment, right? Thus, the physical killing of anybody, while evil for us, is not an example of evil by God. Don't use that excuse. It doesn't work. So, remember I asked this question, is there free will in heaven? Is there free will on the new earth? What's to prevent you from making the new earth as much of an old earth as this is? And this is also the real answer to why they're suffering. I remember the girl I was meeting, she just come out of the army, and she was doubting her faith. And at the end of my talks about apologetics, she asked about this question. And as I was presenting this information, at the end of it, I had a thought. I said, hey, hang on a second. Did you go to boot camp? And she said, yeah, of course I went to boot camp. I was in the army. I said, okay, why did you go to boot camp? She said, well, so I could be honed, so I could be refined, so I could be ready to do the real work. Boot camp is not the real work. It's the training for the real work. She said, it's so we could be screened because boot camp, now it's not perfect because it's the government, but it separates the people who would desert from the people who would always be loyal. And it also ties me into my co-fighters. I mean, all the people in my squadron, we would die for each other. We're going to do anything we can for each other. They can depend on me for anything because we've been through this. Then I said, well, was it easy? She laughed at me. I'm like, she said, no, it wasn't easy. Think about it. If it was easy, it wouldn't work. And then I had this thought. I said, well, did you get hurt in boot camp? Did I hurt? Of course I got hurt in boot camp. Like, here's where I got scratched by the barbed wire. I'm like, wow, that's deep. Here's where I got, I burnt my finger. Can't see it anymore, but I burnt my finger on some fragment or some gunpowder or this. And she had a whole bunch of scars. Okay, fine. I understand. I said, let me ask you this. Those are your scars you got from boot camp. As long as they didn't cause any mental damage or permanent physical damage, just a mark, would you give them up? And she does this. No. I earned them. They're my branding. Folks, this is boot camp. How does God solve the serious problem of not stripping you of your free will in the new earth, yet not allowing it to degrade into the old earth? God is doing two things. He's screening out those who would desert, and he's refining those who wouldn't. It's the same reason why you have no compulsion to skip brushing your teeth at night. When I was a kid, I hated brushing my teeth. Oh, gosh. Now I can't go to sleep unless I brush my teeth. If I forget, I wake up at 2 o'clock in the morning, and my wife's like, where are you going? I forgot to brush my teeth. It's the same reason why I would never cheat on my wife. Why? Because I understand the bond I have with her, and I would never betray my Lord, and I have no desire, I have no compulsion. Now, would I enter into some sort of situation where I could be tempted? No, I'm going to avoid from that too. Why? Because this is what you're going to have to do in the new earth. You're not going to be attracted by all these things because you love the Lord and you love the people you're with. And you're trained and you're refined. It's the same reason why you have no compulsion to go stick a fork in the socket. Or in your eye. Like, why? Why would I do that? Say, yeah, exactly. And so that's boot camp. To train you and to refine you for eternity. To separate those who would sin in heaven from those who would freely never ever do so anymore. To separate the sheep from the goats. To save and sanctify those who would be saved. And how you respond to this boot camp is how you will determine who you are in 10 years. How you react to pain. Will you grow up with the challenges or give up? Will you get hardened and angry? Or will you ask the Lord, what is it that you'd have me learn? I had a friend of mine whose husband died. And she said, Can you talk to my son? He has some really important questions. His question was, why did my dad die? Right? And then his next question was, why do some people get cancer and die? Why do kids die? Well, the reality is this is not about this life. It's never been about this life. It's about a life that's far longer than these mere 80, 90 years. It's about something far greater, far more important, and that's why he's here. So your dad died as a Christian, accepting Christ almost on his deathbed. Yeah. It took him that long to get there. And I think in eternity, you'll look back and say, well, I hated losing my dad. Now I don't want to like it. But I hated losing my dad. But maybe now I have him in eternity. That was far more important. But is there no relief from this pain? How do we endure camp, especially when it seems like the enemy is running it? How do you survive boot camp? What if your boot camp is painful? You feel overwhelmed. You feel helpless. God is not answering you. So there are 5 things I want to give you. These are not the only 5 things, but these are 5 things that I've come up with I think are important, that has affected me. 1, how do you survive boot camp? Understand the purpose of life. It's not about this life. Right? 2, pain is the effect of sin. It's a natural effect of sin. It's going to happen. 3, God will finish the work in you. He's not going to mess up. He knows what he's doing. Unlike the physical boot camp today, right? The army, right? You cannot fall out of God's plan. I always say I probably shouldn't say this, but I always like somebody says, well, you're always okay when you're in the middle of God's plan. I'm like, it's all God's plan. You can't fall out of it. Boot camp is only for a season. Remember, it's only for a season. A man suffering through a tooth extraction doesn't think, why is the dentist doing this to me? A soldier in boot camp does not think, why are they making me suffer through this ropes course or this barbed wire course? A mother giving birth tolerates pain and then amazingly forgets it. Time for the next child. Isn't that great, guys? I'm like, how did she manage to do that again? Because there's so much reward. You have a far greater purpose in life when you understand what this is. You know what the end result is. It's not this. And then you can get through boot camp. Now, I want to go through is, and then you should become a boot camp trainer. See, because there's some people, some people like, okay, God's done with you. I'm going to take you home. And there are others, he's like, okay, I'm done with you, but I need you to stay and come back and work in the camp. Right? I want you to be the trainer. I want you to be the minister. Yeah, I got to put you to work now because I've been working on you. Yeah, there are a few other things that you're going to work on along the way, but you need to go to work. Right? So what are the questions you ask yourself when everything's falling apart? Was this the cause of a bad decision on my part? If not, was it the cause of something I did not know about? If not, what is this test supposed to be teaching me? How is it supposed to refine me? How is this test preparing me for eternity? And remember, this is not about this life. It's about eternity. Do the best you can, then view all trials in context of eternity, but do so without being fatalistic. Not to act is to act, not to speak out is to speak out. But let me close with this. Pain is real. And God has another logical dilemma. Would a loving God abandon us in boot camp? God would never abandon us in boot camp. He said, I love you and I cannot be distant from you. I love you and I cannot be separate from you. I love you and I cannot let you suffer alone. I will share in your sorrows. I will participate with pain, and I will come down and die and survive and hurt alongside you. And he comes to earth as a man of sorrows. He suffers with us. He suffers rejection, injustice, abuse, physical torment, and then he dies. God said, I know boot camp is there, and I am going to go through it with you. God desires a relationship with you. So go get trained for the real work that is to come. Yes, there will be scars, but it is your branding. And when you're on the other side of eternity, you will be loath to give them up. So, my friends, go earn your branding. Thank you. God bless you.
So let's, just a reminder, Wednesday night, 7 o'clock, Neil will be back with us, and then in subsequent weeks as well. Let's go ahead and stand and close in prayer. And Neil told us a lot about having a relationship with God, and if you do not have that relationship and would like to know more about it, please talk to Neil or me after I close in prayer. And again, a reminder, there's food over there. Talk to someone you haven't met. Let's close in prayer. Lord, we do thank you again for the pain that you bring into our lives. Lord, continue to mold us and make us into the servants that you desire. And above all, may you be glorified. And we pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.